All right, we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Make sure you've done the character work first so that you're thinking a little bit about the characters and a little about the setting. And we're going to start about halfway through page 13, where we have this little break in the chapter. The Great Faith Elementary and Secondary School, one of the largest black schools in the county. So this tells us they're at a black school. So again, the first times we're getting evidence of what's going on. Was a dismal end to an hour's journey. Dismal is a good describing word that tells you what the school's like. Consisting of 4 weather-beaten wooden houses on stilts of brick, 320 students, 7 teachers, a principal, a caretaker, and the caretaker's cow, which kept the wide crabgrass lawn sufficiently clipped in spring and summer. The school was located near 3 plantations, the largest and closest by far being the Granger plantation. Most of the students were from families that sharecropped on Granger land, and the others mainly from Monitor and Harrison plantation families. Because the students were needed in the fields from early spring when the cotton was planted until after most of the cotton had been picked in the fall, the school adjusted its terms accordingly, beginning in October and dismissing in March. That explains, if you remember back when we were reading yesterday with Jeremy saying that he'd been at school for a long time and they were just going back for the first time. Here's why. They go from October through March. So that means that these kids, the black population in the area, only had 5 months of school a year, whereas the white kids were getting the regular nine months of school. But even so, after today, a number of the older students would not be seen again for a month or 2, not until the last puff of cotton had been gleaned from the fields, and eventually most would drop out of school altogether. Because of this, the classes in the higher grades grew smaller with each passing year. So that's important. So the kids are missing school because they're having to work in the family fields. And a lot of them don't come back when it starts, not because they're away at camp or not because they're, lazy or have a summer job to make extra money. It's because they're working on the family sharecropping land so that they can live. The class buildings, with their backs practically against the forest wall, formed a semicircle facing a small one-room church at the opposite edge of the compound. It was to this church that many of the school's students and their parents belonged. I think the church is an important thing to notice because it tells you a little bit about the families, that they're religious. As we arrived, the enormous iron bell in the church belfry was ringing vigorously, warning the milling students that only 5 minutes of freedom remained. Little man immediately pushed his way across the lawn to the well. Stacy and TJ, ignoring the rest of us now that we were on school grounds, wandered off to be with their other 7th grade boys. And Christopher, John, and Claude rushed to reunite with their classmates of last year. So if they go to school from October till March, a lot of them probably haven't seen some of their friends for a good 7 months. Left alone, I dragged slowly to the building that held the first 4 grades and sat on the bottom step. Plopping my pencils and notebook into the dirt, I propped my elbows on my knees and rested my chin on the palms of my hands. There's some imagery right there for you. It's a very clear picture in my head of what Cassie looks like at that moment and what she's doing. "Hey, Cassie," said Mary Lou Wellever, great name, the principal's daughter, as she flounced by in a new yellow dress. "Hey yourself," I said, scowling so ferociously that she kept on walking. What does this tell us about Cassie? Is she friendly and outgoing? Not so much. I stared after her a moment, noting that she would have on a new dress. Certainly no one else did. Patches on faded pants and dresses abounded on boys and girls come so recently from the heat of the cotton fields. Girls stood awkwardly, afraid to sit, and boys pulled restlessly at starched high-buttoned collars. Those students fortunate enough to have shoes hopped from one pinched foot to the other. Tonight the Sunday clothes would be wrapped in newspaper and hung for Sunday, and the shoes would be packed away to be brought out again only when the weather turned so cold that bare feet could no longer traverse the frozen roads. I like traverse is a nice word. But for today, we all suffered. So why don't, if they they have a nice pair of shoes, why don't they wear them to church or every day? On the far side of the lawn, I spied Mo Turner speeding toward the 7th grade class building and wondered at his energy. Mo was one of Stacy's friends. He lived on the Montier plantation, a 3.5-hour walk from the school. Oh my goodness gracious, he walks 3.5 hours. Because of the distance, many children from the Montier plantation did not come to Great Faith after they had finished the 4-year school near Smellings Creek. But there were some girls and boys like Mo who made the trek daily, leaving their homes while the sky was black and not returning until all was blackness again. I, for one, was certainly glad that I didn't live that far away. I don't think my feet would have wanted that badly for me to be educated. That's some personification right there. And Cassie seems to have a really good sense of humor. But she's talking about it like her feet have any input in where she goes ever. The chiming of the 2nd bell began. I stood up, dusting my bottom at the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders crowded up the stairs into the hallway. Little man flashed proudly past. Remember, he's starting his first day of school, so he's excited. His face and hands clean and his black shoes shining again. I glanced down at my own shoes, powdered red, and raising my right foot, rubbed it against the back of my left leg, then reversed the procedure. As the last gong of the bell reverberated across the compound, I swooped up my pencils and notebook and ran inside. A hallway extended from the front to the back door of the building. On either side of the hallway were 2 doors, both leading into the same large room, which was divided into 2 classrooms by a heavy canvas curtain. The 2nd and 3rd grades were on the left, 1st and 4th grades on the right. I hurried to the rear of the building, turned to the right, and slid into a 3rd-row bench occupied by Grace Pearson and Alma Scott. I don't know if these are characters that are going to be important that we're going to continue to hear about throughout the story, but if I circle them, then later on it's easy for me to find them if I'm coming back from information. You can't sit here, objected Gracie. I'm saving it for Mary Lou. I glanced back at Mary Lou Wellever, depositing her lunch pail on a shelf in the back of the room, and said, Not anymore, you ain't. Miss Daisy Crocker, so here's more about Cassie telling us that, she sticks up for herself. It doesn't sound like she's friends with many girls at school. Miss Daisy Crocker, yellow and buck-eyed, glared down at me from the middle of the room with a look that said, So, it's you, Cassie Logan. Then she pursed her lips and drew the curtain along the rusted iron rod and tucked it into a wide loop in the back wall. With the curtain drawn back, the 1st graders gazed quizzically at us. Little man sat by a window, his hands folded patiently, waiting for Miss Crocker to speak. Mary Lou nudged me. That's my seat, Cassie Logan. Mary Lou Wellever, Miss Crocker called primly, have a seat. Yes, ma'am, said Mary Lou, eyeing me with a look of pure hate before turning away. So, Mary Lou and Cassie are not friends. It sounds like Miss Crocker is the teacher, and that the 1st graders and 4th graders share a teacher. Miss Crocker walked stiffly to her desk, which was set on a tiny platform and piled high with bulky objects covered by a tarpaulin. She rapped the desk with a ruler, although the room was perfectly still, and said, Welcome, children. I'm going to have you check that word out. Welcome, children, to Great Faith Elementary School. Turning slightly so that she stared squarely to the left side of the room, she continued. To all you 4th graders, it's good to have you all in my class. I'll be expecting many good and wonderful things from you. Then addressing the right side of the room, she said, And to all our little 1st grade friends only today starting on the road to knowledge and education, may your tiny feet find the pathways of learning steady and forever before you. Again, here's some more personification about the feet. Already bored, I stretched my right arm on the desk and rested my head in my upraised hand. Mrs. Crocker smiled mechanically, then rapped on her desk again. Now, little ones, she said, still talking to the 1st grade, your teacher, Miss Davis, has been held up in Jackson for a few days, so I'll have the pleasure of sprinkling your little minds with the first rays of knowledge. She beamed down upon them as if she expected to be applauded for this bit of news. Then, with a swoop of her large eyes to include the 4th graders, she went on. Now, since there are only one of me, we shall have to sacrifice for the next few days. We shall work, 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 but we shall have to work like little Christian boys and girls and share, share, share. Now, are we willing to do that?" "Yes'm, Ms. Crocker," the children chorused, but I remained silent. I never did approve of group responses. Adjusting my head in my hand, I sighed heavily, my mind on the burning of the berries. So it sounds like we're not finished talking about this important event. I'll tell you, this part right here, I never did approve of group responses. It's more evidence to me that Cassie's really independent. Maybe a little bit stubborn. We'll have to see. "Cassie Logan?" I looked up startled. "Cassie Logan!" "Yes, ma'am?" I jumped up quickly to face Miss Crocker. "Aren't you willing to work and share?" "Yes'm." "Then say so." "Yes'm," I murmured, sliding back into my seat as Mary Lou, Gracie, and Alma giggled. Here it was, only 5 minutes into the new school year, and already I was in trouble. By 10 o'clock, Miss Crocker had rearranged our seating and written our names on her seating chart. I was still sitting beside Gracie and Alma, but we had been moved from the third to the first row, in front of a small, pot-bellied stove. Although being eyeball to eyeball with Miss Crocker was nothing to look forward to, the prospect of being warm once the cold weather set in was nothing to be sneezed at either. So I resolved to make the best of my rather dubious, excellent vocabulary word, position. Now, pot-bellied stove, if you don't know what that means, when you read down in here, it's obvious you know a stove, but it's obvious that it's like a heater for the classroom, because she's talking about how it keeps her warm. Now, Miss Crocker made a startling announcement. This year we would have all new books. This year we would all have books. Now, keep in mind that in public schools, students don't own books like we do at St. Mary's Hall. You know, St. Mary's Hall, your parents buy the books, you use the book, you can write in the book, it's yours to keep. But in public schools, and actually a lot of other schools, all schools, it doesn't work like that. The school owns the books and they loan them to you for the year. I remember being in elementary school and we would have to write our name in the front of the book and put a cover on it. You weren't allowed to write in it because next year somebody else would be using it. But it sounds like at Cassie's school they don't normally have books, because this year it says they will all have books. And she says that was a startling announcement, so it tells me that they didn't usually have their own books. Everyone gasps, for most of the students have never handled a book at all besides the family Bible. I admit that even I was somewhat excited. Although Mama had several books, I had never had one of my very own. "Now, we're very fortunate to get these readers," Miss Crocker explained while we eagerly awaited the unveiling. "The county superintendent of schools himself brought these books down here for our use, and we must take extra good care of them." She moved toward her desk. "So let's all promise that we'll take the best care possible of these new books." She stared down, expecting our response. "All right, all together, let's repeat. We promise to take good care of our new books." She looked sharply at me as she spoke. "We promise to take good care of our new books." "Fine," Miss Crocker beamed, then proudly threw back the tarpaulin. Sitting so close to the desk, I could see that the covers of the books, remotely red, were badly worn, and that gray edges of the pages had been marred by pencils, crayons, and inks. My anticipation at having my own book ebbed to a sinking disappointment. But Miss Crocker continued to beam as she called each fourth grader to her desk, and recording a number in her roll book, handed him or her a book. So it sounds like Cassie's disappointed because maybe the books aren't as new as she had hoped they were. It says they're badly worn and marred. As I returned from my trip to her desk, I noticed the first graders anxiously watching the disappearing pile. Miss Crocker must have noticed them too, for as I sat down, she said, "Don't worry, little ones. There are plenty of readers for you too. See there on Miss Davis's desk?" Wide eyes turned to the covered teacher's platform directly in front of them, and an audible sigh of relief swelled in the room. I glanced across at Little Man, his face lit in eager excitement. I knew that he could not see the soiled covers or the marred pages from where he sat, and even though his penchant for cleanliness was often annoying, I did not like to think of his disappointment when he saw the books as they really were. So remember, Little Man likes to be clean, and so she's worried that he's not going to be happy with these old worn books. But there was nothing I could do about it, so I opened my book to its center and began browsing through the spotted pages. Girls with blonde braids and boys with blue eyes stared up at me. I found a story about a boy and his dog lost in a cave and began reading while Miss Crocker's voice droned on monotonously. I like both of these words are good descriptions of not just the teacher. I think it's less a description about the teacher and more description of how Cassie feels about the teacher. Suddenly, I grew conscious of a break in the monotonous tone, and I looked up. Miss Crocker was sitting at Miss Davis's desk with the first-grade boys stacked before her, staring fiercely down at Little Man, who was pushing a book back upon the desk. "What that you say, Clayton Chester Logan?" I think this is Little Man's real name. The room became gravely silent. Everyone knew that Little Man was in big trouble. For no one ever called Little Man Clayton Chester unless she or he meant serious business. Little Man knew this too. His lips parted slightly as he took his hands from the book. He quivered, but he did not take his eyes from Miss Crocker. I said, may I have another book, please, ma'am? He squeaked. That one's dirty. Dirty, Miss Crocker echoed, appalled by such temerity. That's another good word, temerity. She stood up, gazing down upon Little Man like a bony giant. But Little Man raised his head and continued to look into her eyes. Dirty? And just who do you think you are, Clayton Chester? Here the county is giving us these wonderful books during these hard times, and you're going to stand there and tell me that the book's too dirty? Now you take that book or get nothing at all. Little Man lowered his eyes and said nothing as he stared at the book. For several moments he stood there, his face barely visible above the desk. Then he turned and looked at the few remaining books and seemed to realize that they were as badly soiled as the one Miss Crocker had given him. He looked across the room at me. I nodded, and Little Man, glancing up again at Miss Crocker, slid the book from the edge of the desk, and with his back straight and his head up, returned to his seat. Miss Crocker sat down again. Some people around here seem to be giving themselves airs. I'll tolerate no more of that, she scowled. Sharon Lake, come get your book. Giving themselves airs is kind of another term for being kind of snooty or snobby. Think about for a second why she thinks that Little Man is being snooty or snobby. And I wonder what you think, if Little Man has the right to want a clean, newer book, or if, like the teacher said, he should be grateful that he has one at all. I watched Little Man as he scooted into his seat beside two other little boys. He sat for a while with a stony face looking out the window. Then, evidently accepting the fact that the book in front of him was the best that he could expect, he turned and opened it. But as he stared at the book's inside cover, his face clouded, changing from sulky acceptance to puzzlement. His brows furrowed. Then his eyes grew wide, and suddenly he sucked in his breath and sprang from his chair like a wounded animal, flinging the book onto the floor and stomping madly upon it. This is, first of all, some excellent imagery, but we're getting a really good look into Little Man and how he's feeling. He's stomping madly. The simile here, like a wounded animal, sprang from his chair. So, let's see. Miss Crocker rushed to Little Man and grabbed him up in powerful hands. She shook him vigorously, then set him on the floor again. Vigorously is a nice word. Now, just what's gotten into you, Clayton Chester? But Little Man said nothing. He stood staring down at the open book, shivering with indignant anger. Another good one. Pick it up, she ordered. No, defied Little Man. No? I'll give you 10 seconds to pick up that book, boy, or I'm going to get my switch. Little Man bit his lower lip, and I knew that he was not going to pick up the book. Rapidly, I turned to the inside cover of my own book and saw immediately what had made Little Man so furious. Stamped on the inside cover was a chart which read, Property of the Board of Education, Spokane County, Mississippi, September 1922. Now remember, already we are in the 30s, so this book already is close to 10 years old. Here's the order that it was issued. Here's the date, so each new school year someone got it. First year, the condition of the book was new, excellent, excellent, very good. And then it also asked for the race of the student. The blank lines continued down to line 20, and I knew that they had all been reserved for black students. A knot of anger swelled in my throat and held there. But as Miss Crocker directed little man to bend over the whipping chair, I put aside my anger and jumped in. Again, we're in the 30s, so what would happen at school if kids didn't behave like a teacher expected was that they could get whipped or spanked. "Miss Crocker, don't, please!" I cried. Miss Crocker's dark eyes warned me not to say another word. "I know why he done it." "You want part of this switch, Cassie?" "No, ma'am," I said hastily. "I just want to tell you how come little man done what he done." Stop there for a second. Why do you think he did what he did? Why do you think the little man got so angry and threw the book? What do you see here that bothered him? "Sit down," she ordered as I hurried toward her with the open book in my hand. Holding the book up to her, I said, "See, Miss Crocker, see what it says? They give us these old books when they didn't want 'em any more." She regarded me impatiently. So here's her explaining why little man was so upset. Okay? And you'll see it was at the white school all along, and then when the condition became very poor, then they sent it over to the black school. And again, this nigger is not a term that we use still to describe, but this is showing us historical time period. She regarded me impatiently, but did not look at the book. "Now, how could he know what it says? He can't read." "Yes, ma'am, he can. He been reading since he was 4. He can't read all them big words, but he can read them columns. See what says in the last row? Please look, Miss Crocker." This is important because Cassie is standing up for her brother. We know that she's a little bit stubborn, but she really is standing up for her brother. This time Miss Crocker did look, but her face did not change. Then, holding up her head, she gazed unblinkingly down at me. "See what they called us?" I said, afraid she had not seen. "That's what you are," she said coldly. "Now go sit down." Whoa. Is that the reaction you would expect from a teacher? My goodness. So Cassie knows that this isn't okay. That it's not okay to be called by this name. She assumed that her teacher would back her up and that her teacher would agree. But when she showed her the book, the teacher's response was, "That's what you are." And she said it coldly, so it sounds like she wasn't saying like, "Oh, that's okay, that's what you are." It sounds like she's saying, "That's what you are." I shook my head, realizing now that Miss Crocker did not even know what I was talking about. She had looked at the page, she had looked at the page and had understood nothing. "I said sit down, Cassie." I started slowly toward my desk, but as the hickory stick sliced the tense air, I turned back around. This is some good personification there, but it's also letting you know the hickory stick is what they're using to give little man a whipping. And if it sliced the tense air, that means it was going fast. I turned back around. "Miss Crocker," I said, "I don't want my book neither." The switch landed hard upon little man's upturned bottom. Miss Crocker looked questioningly at me as I reached up to her desk and placed the book upon it. Then she swung the switch 5 more times, and discovering that little man had no intention of crying, ordered him up. "All right, Cassie," she sighed, turning to me. "Come on and get yours." We learn right here in this section 2 really important things about little man and Cassie. First of all, they are both very strong. They were willing to take a consequence, standing up for what was right. They were standing up for each other. Remember, little man kind of checked in with his sister to see what to do, and she followed his suit. And also, they have a different kind of confidence, where maybe their teacher thinks that she's deserving of such an inappropriate name as a nigger. But little man and Cassie don't believe that. Little man and Cassie know that they're more than that. They're more than that. That's not. That they're humans just like white people. By the end of the school day, I had decided that I would tell Mama everything before Miss Crocker had a chance to do so. From 9 years of trial and error, I had learned that punishment was always less severe when I poured out the whole truth to Mama on my own before she had heard anything from anyone else. I even know that's true from when I was a kid. I knew that Miss Crocker had not spoken to Mama during lunch period, for she had spent the whole hour in the classroom preparing for the afternoon session. As soon as class was dismissed, I sped from the room, weaving a path through throngs of students happy to be free. But before I could reach the 7th grade building, I had the misfortune to collide with Mary Lou's father, Mr. Welliver. Remember Mary Lou's the daughter of the principal? Mr. Welliver looked down on me with surprise that I would actually bump into him, then proceeded to lecture me on the virtues of watching where one was going. Meanwhile, Miss Crocker briskly crossed the lawn to Mama's class building. This is a good word because I can picture better how she's walking. She's in a rush, and she's not excited to be going somewhere, but she's moving quickly. By the time I escaped Mr. Welliver, she had already disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Mama's classroom was in the back. I crept silently along the quiet hall and peeped cautiously into the open doorway. Mama pushing a strand of her long, crinkly hair back into the chignon at the base. That's a word I didn't even need to look up. At the base of her slender neck. Now, if it's a word that I don't know, but I can guess from reading, she pushed some of her hair back into this thing at the base of her slender neck. So it's telling me that it's either like something that's holding her hair, maybe like a hairnet or a hair holder, or even maybe like her shirt. She's kind of tucking her hair into her shirt. So I can continue reading without looking up the definition, but it's definitely something I want to look back at later. If I couldn't guess what it was, I would need to look it up now. She was seated at her desk watching Miss Crocker thrust a book before her. "Just look at that, Mary." Remember, this will be Ma's first name. Miss Crocker said, thumping the book twice with her forefinger. "A perfectly good book ruined. Look at that broken binding and those footmarks all over it." Mama did not speak as she studied the book. "And here's the one Cassie wouldn't take," she said, placing a second book on Mama's desk with an outraged slam. "At least she didn't have a tantrum and stomp all over hers. I tell you, Mary, I just don't know what got into those children today. I always knew Cassie was rather high-strung." And so here's an example of somebody else's opinion of Cassie, that she's rather high-strung. "But little man, he's always such a perfect little gentleman." Mama glanced at the book I had rejected and opened the front cover so that the offensive pages of both books faced her. "You say Cassie said it was because of this front page that she and little man didn't want the books?" Mama asked quietly. "Yes, ain't that something?" Miss Crocker said, forgetting her teacher training school diction in her indignation. "The very idea! That's on all those books, and why they got so upset about it I'll never know." "You punished them?" asked Mama, glancing up at Miss Crocker. "Well, I certainly did. Whipped both of them good with my hickory stick. Wouldn't you have?" When Mama did not reply, she added defensively, "I had a perfect right to." "Of course you did, Daisy," Mama said, turning back to the books again. "They disobeyed you." But her tone was so quiet and non-committal that I knew Miss Crocker was not satisfied with her reaction. Okay. So Mama said the teacher had a right to punish them because they disobeyed. "Well, I thought you would have wanted to know, Mary, in case you wanted to give them a piece of your mind also." Mama smiled up at Miss Crocker and said rather absently, "Yes, of course, Daisy, thank you." Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out some paper, a pair of scissors, and a small brown bottle. Miss Crocker, dismayed by Mama's seeming unconcern for the seriousness of the matter, thrust her shoulders back and began moving away from the desk. "You understand that if they don't have those books to study from, I'll have to fail them both in reading and composition, since I plan to base all my lessons around." She stopped abruptly and stared in amazement at Mama. "Mary, what in the world are you doing?" Mama did not answer. She had trimmed the paper to the size of the books and was now dipping a gray-looking glue from the brown bottle onto the inside cover of one of the books. She took the paper and placed it over the glue. "Mary Logan, do you know what you're doing? That book belongs to the county. If somebody from the superintendent's office ever comes down here and sees that book, you'll be in real trouble." Mama laughed and picked up the other book. "In the first place, no one cares enough to come down here, and in the second place, if anyone should come, maybe he could see all the things we need. Current books for all of our subjects, not just somebody's old throwaways. Desks, paper, blackboards, erasers, map, chalk." Her voice trailed off as she glued the second book. This is giving us some insight into the mom. Can you tell, is she mad at Cassie and Little Man? Does she seem like she's angry at him, or does it seem like she understands what they did? She's trying to solve the problem here as best she can. She can't afford to get Mom new books, but she's trying to cover up the offensive language. She's trying to cover up where it says that the book is old and not fit for white people. Biting the hand that feeds you. That's what you're doing, Mary Logan. Biting the hand that feeds you. Again, Mama laughed. If that's the case, Daisy, I don't think I need that little bit of food. With the second book finished, she stared at a small pile of 7th grade books on her desk. Well, I just think you're spoiling these children, Mary. They've got to learn how things are sometime. Maybe so, said Mama, but that doesn't mean they have to accept 'em, and maybe we don't either. I have a feeling that this is going to be an important part of the book, whether it's conflict or the theme or tells us about Mama. But here's what she says. Maybe they have to learn how things are, but that doesn't mean they have to accept them. And she's right, that's two different things. Understanding how things are and accepting that they're that way are two totally different things. I can understand that the white people don't treat black people fair at all, but that doesn't mean that I can, that doesn't mean that I have to accept it and just let it go. Miss Crocker gazed suspiciously at Mama. Although Mama had been a teacher at Great Faith for 14 years, ever since she had graduated from Crandon Teaching Training School at 19, she was still considered by many of the other teachers as a disrupting maverick. That's also disrupting maverick. Her ideas were always a bit too radical and her statements a bit too pointed. The fact that she had not grown up in Spokane County, but in the Delta, made her even more suspect. And the more traditional thinkers like Miss Crocker were wary of her. Well, if anyone ever does come from the county and sees Cassie's and Little Man's books messed up like that, I certainly won't accept the responsibility for them. It will be easy enough for anyone to see whose responsibility it is, Daisy, by opening any 7th grade book, because tomorrow I'm going to mess them up, too. Miss Crocker, finding nothing else to say, turned imperiously and headed for the door. I dashed across the hall and awaited her exit, then crept back. Mama remained at her desk, sitting very still. For a long time she did not move. When she did, she picked up one of the 7th grade books and began to glue again. I wanted to go and help her, but something warned me that now was not the time to make my presence known, and I left. I would wait until the evening to talk to her. There was no rush now. She understood. That is the end of chapter 1.